Matthew, please get to the stage.
Privyet. Thank you, Flower Jam, for having me back again, and everybody for coming to listen. So, a little break from lighting now. I'm not going to talk about lighting, although the project I'm going to focus on did have quite a big lighting aspect to the concept. But I thought what I would do is I would talk again about temporary landscapes and bring it back to Flower Jam, because I know a lot of people in the room are involved with Flower Jam this year. And because we're talking about a sustainable message, an environmental message at Flower Jam this year in the city, I also last year had the challenge of communicating an environmental issue for a client through a temporary landscape. So I thought it might be helpful for me to show you my process, my way of thinking, how I got to the concept, and the benefits and the challenges that were involved in being able to get that message across. So I thought I'd start. Yesterday it was interesting. Somebody was asked from one of last year's participants as to whether their previous occupation had helped them with their career. Now, I've been garden designing for the last 10 years professionally. I've always been a gardener, but for the last 10 years professionally. And previous to that, my first life was in the world of advertising. And I never really told anybody this for a long time because I wanted to be like Andy Sturgeon. I'd like kind of been born as a garden designer, but it wasn't the case. And actually what I've realized is that the way I approach garden design, and particularly temporary landscapes, is hugely influenced by my last career and how I approached advertising and how I work with clients there. So I used to work in TV and print and press and kind of putting together concepts in that format previously. And there was a lot of theory, a lot of marketing theory, which just a few things have really stuck. For me, the real focus with any garden that I design are people. That's the first thing. And I think when it comes to any of the sustainable issues we're talking about and trying to make gardens more sustainable, for me, if you put people first and you create a garden that people are going to use and they're going to love and they're going to enjoy, they're going to plant more, they're going to maintain it, I feel all the benefits of wildlife and sustainability are more likely to follow. So people are always at the heart of the gardens I design. So this kind of behavior change was a big theory in the advertising world. How are we going to change the behavior of people, whether that be individuals, communities, citizens, clients, politicians? God, imagine being able to change the behavior of politicians. So the first place I start is understanding my client or the people I'm trying to talk to. Looking at what people currently do, really understanding the context of why they do what they do. The influencers and the influencers. So what are those factors out there that are kind of making them behave in this particular way, and how might I need to change those influences? And then the incentives and the barriers. So how can I kind of change people's perceptions? How can I incentivize them and break down these barriers that are making them act in the way that they are? So a little bit of marketing speak there. So I think there are three key questions now from my advertising background that are really useful when you're designing a temporary garden, whether it be a show garden or an installation, to really try to get to the bottom of. So your target audience, as I touched on, the most important thing. Do I understand my target audience and see things from their perspective? You know, you're not designing something here to communicate to yourself. You've been tasked with speaking to somebody, and there was a lot of talk yesterday from the organisers about the local government really want these gardens to be able to be a place that local Muscovites are going to get and understand and use. So, you know, it's all very well us designing things that aesthetically look brilliant, are going to look great on Instagram, but they have a job to do. So the objective, am I clear about what I would like my target audience to do? So what do I want them to do in that space? So just having touched on that. And then I think the most important thing, Humaira yesterday was talking about design principles, and simplicity is one in design. And I've struggled with it before because I love to layer things and I love kind of detail, but I have learned as a designer to pare back. And in advertising, we talk about a single-minded proposition when we're trying to come up with a creative idea. So the one defining, unique selling point that's going to create impact and lead to change. So, often when you look at marketing messages, whether that be posters or whatever, or even if you go to a garden show and you see lots and lots of gardens, if there's a garden which is full of lots and lots of bitty messages and lots of different elements, you can very, very quickly lose your audience in what you're trying to say. If you pare it back and you keep it simple and you have one very, very clear concept and message, you're going to be much more likely to do the job that your garden needs to do. So the garden that I'm going to tell you about is one that I did at the RHS Hampton Court Palace Flower Show last year, and it was called the Smart Meter Garden. It doesn't sound very sexy, does it? So I was tasked with this, smart meters, that was my client. At first I was like, oh, God, why can't I get a really sexy client like, Andy Sturgeon? But I got the smart meter client. And it's a local, it's basically a national government institution that's been set up in order to roll out something called the smart meters. But when I looked into it and I understood more about the context and the background, I actually thought this is something that really resonates with me, and there's a real potential here for me to say something really important and to make a bit of a mark on the environmental conversation that we're having at the moment about climate change. So CO2 is a huge issue, the emissions of CO2, as we all know. We know that they lead to the warming up of the climate, and we really, really need to reduce our use of CO2. The UK government is committed to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and we're actually doing very well at the moment. That year on year, our CO2 emissions are going down, and that is because we've stopped burning coal. You guys need to do that too. There is still a lot to be done. So the government is rolling out initiatives, and one of them is the smart meter, which is being met with lots and lots of resistance by the British public at the moment. And the whole idea is that these smart meters, real time, will tell people how much gas and electricity they are using. They'll be able to know how much that is costing them in pounds and pence there. So when they turn the kettle on, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I just used 5 pence there. But the more important thing is that it will feed back information straight to the government and energy suppliers real time about how much energy we're using. At the moment, all of our energy is estimated. They actually have no idea until they come and take the readings from our meters how much we're using. So what this will potentially lead to, the bigger picture, is it will allow our government to be able to plan our energy system more effectively, and it will allow us to be able to kind of integrate more renewable forms such as solar and wind and all that kind of thing. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Smart meters are really sexy. So it just became clear that actually I could make a really good garden when I looked at the background of it. However, I said about the resistance that they're being met with, lots and lots and lots of messages at the moment, like people feel that smart meters are going to pose a radiation risk to them. They think that it's a way for the government to spy on them. See, we have these issues as well in England. Smart meters aren't safe. And these are all of the kind of things that are being said at the moment in the local press. And the people that are mainly kind of really listening to all of this are the older generation, the 65 pluses. And they're the people that they're finding very, very hard to adopt the smart meter. So, understanding the target audience, I went to 3 over 65-year-olds, my father, my mother-in-law, and an auntie, all of whom had bought a smart meter at one point. They now all have their smart meters in a drawer, and they never look at them. But when they first got them, they were really motivated by the fact that they could save some money. Oh my gosh, we'll be able to see how much energy we're using. And my mother and father nearly got divorced over this, because my father would keep turning the heating down, and my mother would keep turning it up, and it was an absolute nightmare. And this is how they were first sold, the smart meter. It's going to be a great way for you to save money, and you can do your bit for the environment. And I think it was all the wrong message at the very beginning. So this is the feedback I got from my target audience group here, that they were very motivated at first, but now they thought, what's the point? You know, and why do I need to do anything for the environment? I'm 65 now. I'm not going to be around anyway, you know, in the future when all these real problems start hitting us. However, when I talked to them about the environmental benefits and gave them some of these great facts and figures that the client had given me, and I talked about their grandchildren, all of a sudden, oh yes, that was more of a motivating factor. You know, people of this age, if they have grandchildren, it's like they go goo-goo. It's like they'll do anything for the grandchildren. And that was a real motivating factor. And this more of an idea of us being able to do something collectively rather than as an individual. So the proposition I took out of the client's brief was, if we all get a smart meter, the carbon saved is the equivalent to planting more than 10 million trees every year until 2030. I mean, what a fantastic fact that is. I mean, to say really, really brilliant. And I always try to just take out key words from that single proposition. So for me, it was if we all. So I really felt that was really important, this collective thing, us all coming together. You know, this age 65 plus group, they have experience of the extended family. They maybe have experience of being in wars where we've all had to work together as a team in order to overcome them. You know, nowadays we are much more individualistic. So for me, that was a really important idea for this particular target audience. Obviously, the carbon saving, really important. And then because we're at a flower show, and most of the over 65s at that show obviously love gardening, well, this whole idea, this analogy of trees was, you know, a really, really good one for me to use as a metaphor for smart meters. But what I really wanted to do is I wanted the garden to be about baby steps. I feel that when it comes to a lot of environmental initiatives, we expect people to do a huge amount straight away. I don't think that works. I think it's about taking people on a small journey and showing people that the solutions at the start can actually be very small and very simple. But again, if we all do it collectively, that can make an impact. So I really love this idea then of, you know, so this is all my kind of thought process, really trying to get into the target audience. I'm thinking about the grandchildren again, thinking about trees, and I'm thinking about this idea of planting trees for the future. What a simple thing that is. And as we all know, trees like kind of are the best ways of kind of absorbing CO2 from the environment. I mean, actually, we should think of trees as more valuable than we do when it comes to gold or diamonds. They give us the oxygen we need to breathe, and yet they take all of the real nasties out of the environment. They're actually a really, really, really important thing. But it's just such a simple thing to do, to plant a tree. Really, really simple. So I started to kind of think about this analogy, and I came across this quote by Rabindra Tagore: "The one who plants trees, knowing that he will never sit in their shade, has at least started to understand the meaning of life." So I wanted to use that whole concept, and I didn't want to put a garden with a big smart meter in it, because I knew that would straight away turn people off. I wanted to fill a garden with trees, the majesty of trees, talk about how simple it was to plant a tree, and yet what an amazing thing it could do for the environment, and then hit them with a smart meter message. It's the same as planting a tree. All you have to do is get a smart meter, and you can do something very simple to start making a difference. So that was where I finally got to, and that was the single-minded proposition and key message. So this was kind of the concept for the garden. And it was a big circular area surrounded by lots of different types of birch trees. And in the center was this big black carbon crusted surface, which when people first went into the garden was this really big black area. So they passed all of this lovely vegetation and trees. They were all brought together to sit around this big central black cracked surface, representing coal and our use of carbon. And as they were sat around this centre, this big cracked surface would start to flash with lights, symbolising our erratic use of energy. And smoke would start to come out of the cracks, symbolising CO2 going up into the atmosphere. So we'd really set the scene, the problem of what we were all doing together at the moment. But eventually what would happen is water would start to come up through these cracks and slowly fill this big surface, so that what you ended up with was a great big giant mirror. And in that mirror were reflected the people that had come together, and trees and the environment, a very different scene to what they were met with when they first went in there. So that was what I needed to achieve. I didn't really know exactly how I was going to do it. So as you know, kind of making these gardens are down to a big team of people. I put this slide in because it was our first opportunity to have a bit of an exchange program, and Natasha came over and worked with the planting team, which was run by Humera. So yes, Natasha came over, so thank you publicly for all your help. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a great experience.
No, it was great, really, really good. So yeah, more exchanges. We need to do more exchanges between our country, which would be great. So this is basically the building of the garden. So that was the building of the garden, which all gets done in 20 days. So it's quite a big team effort. So yeah, so as I was just saying, just to quickly talk through all of that concept to show you that we kind of, I feel, did really achieve what we set out to. From the outside, we had this, you know, this scape of lots of lush foliage. I purposefully decided to use ornamental foliage, and I like to always try to kind of do something a bit different. And I used a lot of variegated foliage. In the UK, you know, we're real plant snobs, and variegation at the moment is not kind of something that you see a lot in a lot of gardens. But I always like to try to reintroduce and use new plants. And as we were talking about people actively doing something here for the environment, I didn't want to put a naturalistic meadow. I wanted to put plants that were ornamental, as you would see in a garden setting, but as focusing mainly on foliage, but allowing the trees to kind of be the stars. This is an amazing plant here, Farfugium giganteum, that everybody loved and talked about. Another one from the outside. So you see very much really what you saw when you looked at the garden from the outside was lots and lots of dense planting and people queuing. And then obviously you had all of these specimen trees around the outside so that you could really appreciate the majesty of trees and how beautiful they are, using lots of trees with great textures of bark as well, this being the river birch. And then people going into the garden in the middle there, where it's this great big black surface, thinking, what on earth is this carbuncle this man has produced? Looks awful. So as you can see, a really, really big area here of black, crusty, cracked surface. people looking at it thinking, God, I don't like this very much. And then all of a sudden, the cracks starting to flash with lights, smoke starting to come through the cracks. There I am there, look. And then the water feature filling with water, it continuing to light, but there being still this kind of real, the water being not very still and really kind of turbulent. And eventually the water all pulls completely tight to create the most amazing kind of reflections in the garden and completely change the center of that space to one of people and trees. Another one of me. I put the pictures in that I like of myself. And then what's really important, and this is where my marketing hat comes on again, is that you will often get a client wanting to put logos in a garden or put something in. Sometimes it'll end up looking like a trade stand or being too obvious. So for me, nothing of that is visible at the front of the garden when you look at it. That's the mystery. That's how I want to get people in. They're interested in being there to look at gardens, not to hear about smart meters. But at the back of the garden, I built this great big shelter, which allowed lots of staff there to talk about smart meters, to demonstrate them. I had lots of leaflets, and we had messages on the back of the walls with views back through into the garden, so still making that connection to the message that we had talked about. And then finished the garden with that key quote that I'd been inspired by. And then, this is Natasha again. This is just very quickly just to show you that process sped up of it. Flashing and smoking. Very end, it all drained away. What we did with this garden is that often when you have an interactive space at the shows, they get so congested with people walking through them that they don't enjoy the environment. And we purposely decided to only allow 20 people into the garden at a time. And the water feature being on this cycle meant that they stayed. When the water drained away, they got nicely kind of, moved on to the back space. And as a result, I felt then you were able to really have that reflective, contemplative space that I was trying to achieve without it being congested with people with big trolleys and things. And then obviously, from a lighting perspective, the show isn't open at night, but the LEDs we used were so strong so that they had the impact during the day. But also, from a point of view of Instagram and all of that kind of thing, we knew it was going to be something that was going to look great at night and kind of get shared around as a concept. So we did that, and then this just kind of just shows that lighting at night, how dramatic it is. Okay, so there we go. So theatre in the garden being really, really important. But then again, going back to my marketing head, for me it's really important to then justify to the client what we've done, that it was actually worth them spending that money. So I'm always very much involved with my clients, particularly if it's a show garden, to make sure that they're tracking and they're monitoring. And we had research, both qualitative and quantitative, taking place on the show garden throughout the year, because it's really important to get that feedback. And obviously another metric is the actual the advertising that is achieved as a result, the reach. The kind of results we got were amazing. Well, first of all, we got Best in Show, which is fantastic. So that always gives you really great, thank you. And it achieved, right, I've got to remember these off the top of my head now, it achieved in July 6.6 million impressions. That's on TV, press and print, so 6.6 million. But then for the total campaign, 11.6 million impressions on TV, press and print. And then online, they got 9 million additional hits than what they would necessarily have had if it wasn't expected. So huge, huge reach. The uplift was seen that they had an 18-month high in terms of positive feeling towards the smart meter. So that kind of achieved that change. What was the other one? And the general outtake was about being able to do something small for the environment. So, you know, all of those kind of research kind of boxes were ticked, which was fantastic. And hopefully they'll work with me again as a result. Finally, but the most important thing was that by the end of the show, I couldn't stop people actually really wanting to engage. And thank goodness we built it really, really safe, because kids and people then were actually kind of playing in it. So from the point of view of it being a temporary garden, it's wonderful to see that it could work as well as an actual space. But even more important than the kids was that our target audience, the over 65s, absolutely loved the garden and had fun as well. So that was brilliant. So just very, very quickly, 2 more minutes. So last year I talked to you about the B&Q garden, and that was a very, very different garden, which was all about busy Lizzies and things that I did at Hampton Court as well. But they came back to me this year, and we'd had lots of talks about kind of environmental sustainable issues. I was using lots of plastic pots, and I was saying, why aren't your plastic pots recycled, or they don't have enough products? So they got me in to talk about this with them, and we decided they were too far away from a material product point of view, but actually there's lots of positive things to talk about plants, because they're the biggest seller of plants in the UK. So we came up with this bee campaign, which is all about creating bee pit stops, and we wanted to encourage the nation to create 10,000 bee pit stops around the country in their garden. What B&Q wanted to do was they wanted to sell lavender. So that was their purpose, but it was so great to see that they could see that the benefit in using an environmental sustainable message as a selling point. So those are the 4 stops. We designed this great big advertising billboard with the recognizable hexagon in it and a big living wall, and we plonked it outside of one of the major train stations at King's Cross for people to interact with, getting them to understand that they could buy plants for bees. And then we had an ongoing social media campaign where we told people how they could make their own bee pit stops and things. So yeah, last one. So then how this then translates into the real world, apart from temporary gardens, is I'm seeing now clients coming to me and saying they want to be more environmental when I build gardens for them. So this is a site I'm just working on at the moment, which has lots of amazing Westmoreland limestone on it. And we're putting in a swimming pool, and we're putting in a big pond, and lots of planting and everything to make it a much more environmentally friendly space. But what we're doing is we're doing zero waste off-site. And what I mean by that is anything that's on-site, we're not taking off. So obviously we're going to reuse all of this rock, but everything else we're going to reincorporate into the actual landscape, and we're going to work with the contours of the site. So we end up with something which looks very naturalistic, but reuses all of the materials that are currently there on site. So last point, I just think that as landscape designers, we all have a huge ability here to do our bit for the environment. We're actually like an army here for climate change and for the environment. And I think through our work, we can be the ones that can really, really help make a difference. That's it.
Вдохновляюще.
That's quite inspiring. All right. Good afternoon. The project is amazing, but I have a kind of mismatch. So on one hand, we are trying to attract people's attention to the environment using, these not environmental things like plastic and many other technologies which are dark into this. What do you think about it as a marketeer? Where your marketeer hat? Could you tell me whether this wow effect is really necessary? Well, it is, sure. Without it, we will not invite so many people. But theoretically, can we attract people without this wow effect and without the use of so much, non-natural things? Because it's kind of double standards. We say, okay, we love nature and the environment, and we attract people with the things we are trying to kind of fight with.
It's a very good point. And show gardens and temporary installations get a lot of criticism, or there's a lot of conversation about whether they're a sustainable thing to do because of the temporary nature of them. So there's firstly that, and I think Humera yesterday talked about lots of different ways that we can look to recycle materials and donate them so that they do have an ongoing life. So there's that point. But one of the things that I really struggled with is that I came up with this concept that used all of this lighting and these water features, which obviously used a lot of energy. And what I'm doing is I'm telling people that we want to stop using energy. But with my marketing hat back on, I'm a realist. And I know that sometimes you have to spend and you have to have a footprint in order to make a difference, a greater difference. So by doing that activity and there being that, CO2 imprint that was involved in, kind of the running of the electrics and having the temporary installation and everything, we actually managed to speak to, or people saw it, 11.6 million people. Now, even if we just convert, I don't know, let's say 1,000 people of that to get a smart meter, for me, over a lifetime, that's going to be a much bigger saving than what we did in terms of that thing. So I think we've got to be realists in this society. Now, that's what I was saying about small baby steps. We're all human beings. We all love going on long-haul travel. We all love the kind of the creature comforts we have, but we have to start being a lot more conscious, aware, and making change wherever we can in order to make a difference. And I think it's about getting that, just being a realist and getting that balance right.
Fair enough.
Good afternoon. This is really amazing. How long-lived is it? Well, how strong and how vandal-resistant is it? How long these materials are going to last, given the sun and winter and other things? I mean, the human factor is also important to consider.
This is a show garden, so we're in difference to Moscow Flower Jam, which is there for 4 months. The RHS, the Royal Horticultural shows in the UK, are only there for a week. So it's a temporary thing. So as I showed you those advertising big billboards at the front, or the TV kind of adverts that we see on the TV, this is really what that is, but only as a garden. It's a way of communicating a bigger message. And there's 2 benefits to that. It gives us a job. We take some of that marketing money away from companies and allows us to invest it in plants and people in our industry. But it also allows us to really reach the people that are really interested in gardens and everything. So that's the reality. It's very much a marketing tool, a show garden. But what we're doing now is that all of those trees were all planted in gardens. All of the materials are all recycled and they're all donated to hospitals and schools and reused. So that's something that the RHS are very, very strong on, that everything kind of gets recycled or reused.